welcome. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you all about podcasting. My name is Francesca Fionda, and I'm an investigative journalist. I am also a journalism instructor. And a little bit about me, I've worked at a bunch of different places. So I've reported for online, for television, for podcasting. Right now, I mostly write for an organization called the Tyee, which is a local online news magazine that covers stories around BC. I also help out at Indigenews, which is another really awesome news organization. So if you're looking to diversify where you get your news from, I highly recommend those two places. But you can see from my, can you see my slide? Just checking to make sure. You can give me like a happy face in the chat, maybe, just to let me know that my slide is up there and you can see it.
Yeah, I can see the slide.
Okay, perfect. So one of the podcasts that I worked out was called Attention Control, and the podcast focused on the hidden ways that we are controlled, our decisions are controlled, and it focused on the election. And one of the stories that I worked on was about a data breach, and I wanted to share a little clip about a little clip from this story, because part of what podcasting, or part of what creating an audio story is setting the scene, meaning you might want to record audio that isn't just about your conversation, but it's about the sounds that are around you. So hopefully this works. Can you just give me like a smiley face in the chat to let me know that the audio is working if I hit play? Going up.
We're heading up one of the most iconic buildings in Canada. So now you know that we're in Vancouver. Those seagulls, they are the sound of the city in its quiet places. Like the rooftop of the semicircular Vancouver Public Library.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Pepperoni pizza.
That's our attention control correspondent, Francesca Fionda, 9 floors up there.
Pepperoni pizza. I'm vegan, so definitely not pepperoni pizza. Yeah, pea.
She's on top of the library to bring us her next investigation into how carelessly our personal data is being protected when we're at our most vulnerable.
So that's just the start of this episode. Maybe, Guran, can you tell me a little, you can write it in the chat. What were some of the sounds that you heard at the beginning there? Can you tell where we were just from the sounds? You can unmute, or you can write it in the chat if you prefer.
Like you said, there was like seagulls, and afterwards there was like a sound effect of I don't know what it's called, like a beeping sort of electric sound.
Yeah, that's right. It was like the elevator beeping. You're right. I don't think there's a technical word for it, but the idea was that if you're listening, maybe the sounds would help kind of transport you into this elevator. And basically I'm in an elevator and I'm going up to the top floor of the Vancouver Public Library in downtown Vancouver. And all I did was I had my recorder on the whole time so that I could record all the sounds. And there was a lot of different things to pick up on, like the seagulls and just the hum of the elevator, and it also gave people an idea of where I was going. And so for this story, it was about basically a researcher had uncovered a big data breach of personal health data, and they were using radio frequency to show me how that data was being leaked. And so we went to the top of the roof, and this researcher set it all up and showed me, and I recorded the whole process. And so part of creating an audio story is remembering that, like, it's not just the sounds of you talking or someone else talking, it's also the sounds of what's happening around you. Another story that I did for Attention Controlled was called The Data on Us. And this was a story about how political parties are collecting data on voters and using that data to help them win campaigns. For my part in the investigation, I tried to see how much data political parties were collecting on me personally. Because in Canada, there's something called the Freedom of Information Act, or access to information, and you have the right to request your data from government and public bodies. But political parties are exempt, meaning that they don't have to share that data with you. And so we explored if there was a way for us to maybe learn about what kind of data political parties have on voters. So I'm just going to play a short part of this story. But in it, I interview experts, I make phone calls. And so the type of audio that I'm recording is really different. It's sometimes I'm recording a phone call, sometimes I'm recording an interview in person with someone, sometimes it's over Skype or Zoom. And then, other times it's interviews with experts, interviews with regular folks. So I'll just share a few moments of this episode, but I have to find the spot, so it might take. And you'll hear, so for example, you'll hear the host of the show, Kevin Newman. So sometimes podcasts will have a host who takes kind of the listener through the entire journey of whatever topic it is you're going to explore. So that's Kevin Newman. And then sometimes there'll be contributors. So myself, I was a correspondent is another word for it. And so I would share some package stories that would play in the podcast. So there's lots of different types of podcasts. Some are, talk show podcasts where two people are having a conversation. Maybe the host invites an interviewer to come on. In this case, it was more of an edited package where we would submit stories that had a lot of sounds added to it, music, and we edited together lots of different conversations to tell a story. So I'm just going to hit play, and we might hear a few seconds of the story that was right before, and then an intro to the story that I'm working on.
And it is increasingly becoming slim.
Cool discussion, man. Thank you. Thanks for having it.
Thank you.
So I'm thinking there must be something to what our insider just told us, because the political parties guard what data they have on us with firewalls of no comment. In every province except for one, Canada's privacy laws don't apply to them either. So there is no independent oversight on what they collect on us and how they use it. One thing we know is that Elections Canada has to provide the parties with names and addresses of the 26 million of us who are registered to vote in Canada. But as we've just heard, they're collecting a lot more on top of that. So that gave us an idea. What if our investigative reporter, Francesca Fionda, tried to find out what kind of information the parties have on her?
Everything we do is leaving behind digital footprints. From the moment we wake up to where we go,
in 1 kilometer, exit left,
to who we talk to, our data is being extracted. And where our data goes can be really hard to track, especially when it ends up in the databases of political parties. That's because, unlike companies or government agencies, most political parties in Canada don't have to tell us. They're exempt from many of our privacy laws, meaning we don't have a right to ask them what data they have on us, where they got it from, and what they plan to do with it.
Essentially, at the federal level at least, it seems to be pretty much open season on Canadians.
That's Teresa Scassa. She's the Canada Research Chair in Information Law and Policy at the University of Ottawa. She's been researching data and privacy since the late 90s and early 2000s, back when dial-up internet was a thing. Over the phone, she told me how parties can do almost anything with our data.
If there aren't any laws that define the interests of Canadians in their data in the hands of political parties, and give them actionable rights with respect to their data in the hands of political parties, then there's not a whole lot that an individual can do with respect to the collection or use, disclosure, safekeeping, correction, accuracy of their personal information. And I think this is an issue that's come up in respect of political parties and personal information, where it's a bit of a Wild West. I mean, if you don't have a right of access, you can't go to the political party and say, I'd really like to know what you've got on me in your files.
But I wanted to find out if, regardless of the laws, parties would tell me what data they had on me. Do they have my social media information or my ethnicity? Will they tell me what they're collecting? So I put the parties to the test and called every federal political party's general line. I didn't say I was a journalist because I wanted to know, as a registered voter, what have you got on me in your files?
Thank you for calling the Conservative Party of Canada. Please press 1 for English. Thank you for calling the Green Party of Canada. Merci d'appeler le Parti vert du Canada. Pour le service au français. Thank you for calling the Liberal Party of Canada. If you know the extension of the person you're trying to reach, please dial it now.
Most were at least willing to tell me they had my name and address. All parties can legally get that information from Elections Canada.
Green Party of Canada, Kat speaking, bonjour.
Oh, hi there. I'm calling to see if I can request whatever data the Green Party has on me. How would I do that?
I can look it up for you.
Okay, you can just look it up there.
Yeah.
Great.
What's your name?
My name is Francesca Fionda.
Yeah, it looks like we just have your address and your name.
Okay, my address and my name. And so how can I request that to see if that information you have is accurate?
We have it
Okay, yeah.
in Vancouver. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, that was easy.
The NDP responded via email with my name, address, voting history, and 2 instances when I spoke to their canvassers. The Liberals also told me they recorded how often a canvasser came to my address and whether or not I was home.
Let me see here. We also have the contact history that we have with you when we canvass, and when we go door to door, we log responses, but all of them seem to be not home that we have in our system here.
Oh, wow. So every time you knock on someone's, or you try to knock on someone's door, you have a note of whether or not you were able to speak to anyone at that address?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And I'm just curious, how many times have you knocked on that door looking for me?
3, but all 3 of them were in 2015.
Okay, 3 times in 2015. Okay.
Yeah.
And if I was to answer and chat with someone, basically what I said would be recorded in your database?
Well, it wouldn't be like the exact conversation, but it would be more like, would you like a lawn sign? Would you like to volunteer? Do you plan to support the Liberal Party? It's basically the way we usually lay out questions in a general riding. That's usually how they're laid out.
Okay. And do you know, I know that was just for me, but generally, do you normally add other information onto profiles?
It really depends on how detailed the Elections Canada information is that they provide us, and whether they have phone numbers and what their most recent address is and things like that. But for example, if we call somebody and they say, "Oh, I've moved to a new address," we'll have their old and their new updated address on file.
Okay, so any updates from Elections Canada or updates from the individual themselves?
From an individual, yeah.
Okay. I'm just curious because, you know, watching some of the things that are happening in the States with social media and all that other kinds of things that could be monitored. I was just curious if maybe any of my social media use was part of that profile.
No, yeah, no, absolutely not. We don't have any of that here listed.
Okay, great. Well, thanks. This has been really helpful. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Always happy to help. And if you have any other questions, feel free to give us a call back.
Okay, thank you so much. Here's what happened when I called the concern.
So that's just an example of some of the audio that I collected for this story. So it was like you heard a mix. I interviewed an expert named Teresa Scassa. You'll hear, if you listen to the full episode, you'll hear more from her. I made a lot of phone calls because that was part of the investigation. Generally speaking, as a journalist, you make sure that you present yourself as a journalist every time you're interviewing someone. For this story, I got special permission in terms of thinking through the repercussions of calling as a journalist versus calling as a voter and learning more information about myself, which is what I was doing. And so the story kind of shares the journey of me trying to get my own information and telling it through audio. So when it comes to putting that all together, so you heard an episode that was collecting kind of the sounds of a scene. You heard audio from an interview, from phone calls. How do you bring that all together? And what are some tips and things that you might want to think about when you're interviewing someone? How do you reach out to an potential person that you might interview? I know it can be nerve-wracking to see if somebody would be interested in chatting with you, but the truth is it's actually often really fun. You get to learn about someone, you get to share, you get to hear someone's story, and most of the times people are really generous with their time and willing to say yes. So interviewing in journalism, some things to remember is it's really important to have active listening, meaning that you have to pay attention to what the person is saying. Gaining trust is really important as well. So having someone feel comfortable, maybe that means making sure that you find a space or a location or a time or a date that works really well for them. It means sharing a little bit about your project, being honest about who you are and what your intentions are. And then curiosity is asking good questions. And so thinking through some of the questions ahead of time, ahead of your interview is really important. It'll save you time, it'll save your interviewee time, and it'll make sure that you get some really meaningful responses. So in journalism, and so in podcasting, if you're going to be doing an interview as well, just an interview is just a chance to have a conversation with someone. Don't try and psych yourself up too much. It's just an opportunity to gather some information and ask questions to someone about their perspectives, about their experiences. Maybe it's a specific event or incident. Maybe it's something about their actions, something that they've done. In journalism, we often do accountability interviews, meaning that we are asking someone to explain their actions, most likely a person or organization in power that makes decisions that affects other people. So when you are ready to ask somebody for an interview, you've done some research and you realize that this is somebody you think would be really interesting to speak to and that could speak about the topic that you are covering. So like I said, be honest about your intentions. Let them know, hey, I'm working on a podcast. It's about Ringette. And I really would like to talk to you about your experiences coaching, for example. So ask the person if they would feel comfortable talking to you. Be specific about what topics you'd like to cover. Let them know how long it'll take. So how long will your interview take? I'm hoping we will be able to chat for 10 to 20 minutes. And then let them know how the conversation will be recorded and where it will go once it's recorded. So, you could say, I want to record the audio because I'm hoping to use it for a podcast. And I publish that podcast on my website or on Stitcher or Spotify. That way they know, someone might be listening to that conversation and they might have access to it outside of just you and them. So once you've made that request, maybe you did it in person or email or over the phone, make sure that you are researching the person you're going to interview. You should do that before your request as well. And then once they say yes, really try to make sure that you're up to date with who this person is, if they've published anything before. Find a good quiet place that they feel comfortable, and then write a list of questions that you might ask. So, I like to 5 to 10 questions is a good amount of questions, depending on how much time you have with someone. And then when you're in a conversation, you'll probably have some follow-up questions that you ask after they say something, because it maybe in your mind it triggers another idea. So we're going to listen to this interview here, because there's lots of different types of interviews that you might do. Maybe you're going to do an interview with a community member that you meet, or a kid. So this is an interview that kind of went viral. We're going to listen to it, and then as you're listening to the interview, listen to the questions that this reporter asks, and think about, were the questions open-ended or closed-ended? Open-ended means that somebody could answer with a lot of detail and description. Closed-ended means it's a yes or no question. So if I say, how are you feeling today? That's an open-ended question. If I say, are you feeling good today? That's a closed-ended question. It's a yes or no. So when you're doing an interview, it's really important to try and, think about those kinds of questions and why you might choose one or the other. So as you're listening, think, is this open-ended or closed-ended? And what's the difference in the responses?
One second. What did you think about the ride?
It was great. And apparently, I've never been on live television before, but apparently sometimes I don't watch the news because I'm a kid, and apparently Grandpa just gives me a remote after we watch the Powerball.
It's the Powerball.
Tell me about the ride. What did you think about the ride?
Well, it was great.
Why?
Because apparently you're spinning around, and apparently every time you get dizzy,
Yeah.
that's all you do is get dizzy.
Is it fun?
Yeah. And I've never ever been on live television. I never ever be on live television.
Are you excited?
Yeah, and apparently I only went down the super slide. When I went down the one, I was scared half to death. I just freak out.
Okay.
What I need his name. Hi, honey. Hold on. Yep. Hold on. I'm just gonna ask him. What's his name?
Noah.
Noah. What's your last name?
Dick Ritter.
How do you spell his last name?
Ritter. R-I-T-T-E-R.
Okay. Where are you guys from?
Wilkes-Barre.
Wilkes-Barre. All right, buddy. Good stuff. Have fun.
Marge Unflack, come to security. There's a boy here looking for you. Marge Unflack.
All right.
There's a boy here
That
looking
is
for you.
my dad's town, Tom Jersey.
Tom's River, New Jersey.
So that's Noah Ritter, and he was interviewed at fair. And anybody remember the first question that was asked? Did you catch it, or any of the questions that were asked?
I'm not sure if it's the first question. I might not have a catch it, but I think she asked about the ride, and afterward asked his name and where he's from.
Yeah, perfect. So the first question, I think it was something like you mentioned, it was about the ride, and the question, let's listen to how it was asked.
One second. What did you think about the ride?
It was great.
So the first question you can hear is, what did you think about the ride? Open-ended question, and we got a really fun, detailed answer from Noah, who really went into some fun detail about his experience. And then the next question.
Do you watch the Powerball?
It's the Powerball.
Tell me about the ride. What did you think about the ride?
Again, she says, she has a follow-up. If you want more information from someone, you say, tell me about that. They give you a little bit of information and you want to hear more. A good follow-up is, tell me more about that. You're not asking a specific yes or no question, and it gives the person an opportunity to really open up. And then, of course, it's really important to always make sure that you get the person's name and how to spell it. So those are some tips to help bring up some conversations with the people you interview.
One second. What did you think about the ride?
So yeah, Noah, if you want to go on YouTube and find more Noah Ritter after that interview, he kind of went viral and has he appeared on a lot of different interview shows. So this is like a really different kind of an interview. It's called an accountability interview that we're going to watch here. While we're watching, I'll just ask you to think about, what is the tone of this interview? So is it similar to the interview that we heard just before with Noah? Is it different? And what do you think the intent of this interview is? Why was this interview had? So I'm just going to click a YouTube link here. Just going to get the ad out of the way here. So it's a longer interview, but we'll listen to a few parts of it. So I'm just going to share my screen again.
Mr. Scheer invents reason for refusing to answer questions and tell the truth. This story shows how corrupt our old parties are. This is the kind of dirty politics that fuels Canadians' cynicism about politics.
People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier responding to claims in a Globe and Mail report that the Conservative Party hired a consulting firm to discredit the People's Party of Canada. The controversy coming at the worst time for the Conservative Party as we head into the final hours before polls open. And federal Conservative Party leader Andrew Scheer is joining us live from Richmond. Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Scheer. This has been one of the dirtiest campaigns in many Canadians' memory, and with the latest allegations that your party has hired Warren Kinsella to attack Maxime Bernier, many are concerned about the kind of campaign you're running. On this final day, how do you feel about the campaign you've led?
We've run a very positive campaign. Every morning we make an announcement about how we're going to make life more affordable for Canadians, how we're going to leave more money in their pocket, and how they're going to have a brighter future. When we look at the other parties, when I look at Justin Trudeau calling people who don't believe in the same things that he believes or don't hold the same views that he holds, he calls them un-Canadian. When the Liberal War Room, the Liberal campaign tries to make a link between a construction worker that I'm shaking hands with, trying to link that to racist groups, I see a lot of negativity coming from the Liberal campaign. But now in the last day here before polls open, the choice really is between a positive Conservative government that will make life more affordable and an NDP Liberal coalition that will have to raise taxes to pay for their billions and billions in new deficits.
But Mr. Scheer, when asked why you're spreading false information about your opponents, like among other false statements saying the Liberals will decriminalize hard drugs and saying the Liberals and NDP will raise GST, when they say that's a lie, you can't draw conclusions where the hard facts don't back up what you're saying. So you've explained your reasoning to Canadians. My question to you this morning is, how do you explain to your 5 children, from toddler to teenage, that it is okay to lead a dirty campaign based on information that is not entirely true and constant attacks on your opponents?
Well, of course, I reject the premise of that question. We know that, like night follows day, tax hikes follow massive deficits. And when you add the NDP and Liberal platforms together, you see the deficit ballooning to $40 billion. Now, taxes will have to go up to pay for that. If it's not the GST, it could be personal taxes. But that's up to Justin Trudeau to have the guts to tell Canadians today before they go and vote which taxes he will raise. We saw the same playbook in other governments. When Liberals run massive deficits, the tax hikes follow. And I believe that Canadians have a right to know before they vote what types of deals Justin Trudeau will make with the NDP, what types of taxes he will have to raise in order to pay for the NDP platform commitments. I believe that is a legitimate question to put to Justin Trudeau in the 24 hours before polls open.
It is a legitimate question that many are saying you have chosen to answer yourself and put in campaign ads, sometimes focused towards minority communities, and therein is where the concern lies.
Well, when we're talking about decriminalizing hard drugs, I point to you that Liberal members of Parliament on the House of Commons Health Committee endorse this idea. Many of their candidates are supportive of this idea. Justin Trudeau himself said that he was not going to do this right away. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what it is that the Liberal Party will do on this, but we do know a lot of Liberal candidates want to push for this. So we've warned Canadians about this in many languages. We're going to continue to warn Canadians that this is something that Liberals are contemplating. On our side, Canadians can have certainty. We will not pursue this course of action. They are unable to say that because they have so many Liberal candidates that are pushing for this type of thing.
All right, Mr. Scheer, you and your other party leaders are choosing to spend this final day in battleground BC. Why are you here, and how important is BC's vote in this election?
So that was a different kind of interview. Like I said, it was an accountability interview. And I'll share my screen again here in a second. But what did you think about the tone of this interview? Was it the same or different as the previous one? What kinds of things did you notice?
The tone was much more serious than the previous one, since it was about the a campaign, and it's on the news. So yeah, it's a more serious matter than the previous interview.
Yeah, definitely. You picked up on that. That's totally right. This is way more serious. So this is, like I mentioned, it's an accountability interview. This anchor from Global, Neetu Gurcha, is amazing at asking questions of politicians and kind of demanding answers. And so you can see from the tone, it's a lot more serious, and sometimes it's important to have maybe a yes or no question, but there was still some open-ended questions. And in an interview like this, you have to work really hard to make sure that the person is answering the questions that you want answered. They might try and steer you away from something, or give you a message that is sort of kind of answering the question, but not really. And so as an interviewer, you have to go back to the question and say, well, what I asked you is this. It's different than, say, if you're interviewing someone like Noah Ritter, who you want to hear more about their experience. You let them talk and you ask follow-up questions. You let them lead the conversation. And in this situation, it's up to you to make sure that the conversation stays on topic. So maybe for a podcast that you're working on, let's say if you were doing a podcast about sports and there was some sort of controversy, and maybe there was maybe you were recording a game and a referee made a really controversial call, and you wanted to interview them about that, and they, the game went really well overall, and you want to steer them back to that decision. Well, what I'm asking you about is this call that you made. So it's maybe as an example of an accountability interview you might do for your podcast. So the last kind of interview that I'll just talk a little bit about is experts. So these can be people with lived experiences, they can be academics and researchers, they can be lawyers. There's lots of different types of expertise out there, but basically it's someone who has a really good knowledge of the topic that you're interested in. Are there any experts that come to mind for some of the topics that you're thinking of?
Like maybe experienced players, coaches, or like some of the, maybe even like referees who or players who played on some of the like the AA teams.
Excellent. Yeah, those are some really great examples of some experts that you might find in Ringette. Some people who, like you said, they have a lot of experience in the area. Maybe they are an official. And so this is, you might want to, if you're putting together a podcast, maybe you want to have a range of different experts, a range of different community folks, maybe some fans. Those are the Noah Ritters of your podcast. And you talk to, like you said, more experienced players. And getting a range of experiences makes it really interesting. So I'm going to just quickly go over a few tips on how to record good audio, and then we can chat more if you have any more specific questions. This is now that you've got your interview, you've gained the confidence to ask somebody, will you chat with me? How do you make sure that you record that conversation and get some good quality audio? So if you're recording on your phone, you can absolutely do that. Most phones have really good audio recorders, whether you have an Apple device or an Android device. I can share some links on how to do that with you if you like. But most phones have an audio recorder already set up. So just as an example, I have an iPhone. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the voice. So it's the voice memo. It looks like this. It has a little welcome to voice memo. So if you have a iPhone, you can use that. If you have an Android, there's also a similar program on your phones that can record audio. You can also record on your computer. These are free audio recording programs. So if you have a Mac or a PC, you can get QuickTime. There's also the Sound Recorder app if you have a Windows operating system. And then I can share some links as well if you're looking for some guides on what kind of audio recorders that are free that you can just use on your phone or your laptop. So you don't need a fancy audio recorder to record good audio. What's important is kind of setting up the scene, making sure that you have a quiet space. So, in the time of COVID right now, if you're in person with somebody who's outside of your bubble, you want to make sure that you're 6 feet apart, that you're wearing a mask, and maybe if the weather's nice, you can interview them outside in a quiet spot. Of course, with masks, it can be really hard to get good audio. So maybe it might be even better audio to make sure that you can stay farther apart or do the interview over the phone or over Zoom. If they're in your bubble, maybe you're going to interview someone that is in your household, or hopefully very soon we'll all be able to be in person more often. What you want to do is you want to kind of set up the recorder about 6 inches away from your mouth and about 6 inches away from your interviewer's mouth so that you can capture your questions as well as their responses. And if you can't do the interview in person, you can do it over Zoom. So this is being recorded right now. This is an example of how you might record an interview. You can use Skype and Facebook as well. So if you have QuickTime on your computer, you can record audio as well. So it might be a good backup program. Whatever room that you're in, try to make sure that it's small to medium sized. And actually, it's better that it has a lot of stuff, preferably soft stuff, because hard surfaces can bounce noise and it can make it really echoey. So actually the more soft things, sometimes you can, if you hang a carpet or a blanket on some walls, that's a really good way to kind of buffer the noise. And think about all the other noises that maybe you've gotten used to. So for example, is there a fan on? Make sure you close all the windows and doors so traffic from outside can interfere with a recording. This is my recording booth, very fancy, as you can see. Just being sarcastic because it is a closet, and you can see that it's a small space. I have my kind of clothes hanging on either side as a soft barrier, and behind me is a blanket. And that was my way of recording. That's my recorder on the table there. That's how I recorded the podcast. So if you're on your computer, you want to make sure that your speakers are up to a good volume, maybe not too loud so that it doesn't have that kind of vibration noise coming through. You can set up your phone about 6 inches from your mouth and close to the computer speaker, and then you could record the audio as well on your computer. So it's always good to have a backup. So you're going to record on your main device, and then if you can record on your phone as a backup, that's great, because can be technical difficulties. Maybe you lose one of the files. If you can record on 2 different devices, your interview, that's always a bonus, and we'll make sure that you have less stress if something happens to one of the recordings. So lastly, always test your recorder before an interview. Maybe if you remember from the very beginning, the first clip that I shared with you, I asked the interviewee to say pepperoni pizza was my audio test. Pepperoni pizza is a good, or something with a lot of peas is a good test, because you can tell if it's really, like if you hear that there's a really high noises coming back from the P sounds, you might want to back up from your recorder or turn down the levels if you have that option. And then I just played it back to make sure that it was working, and then it was. So yeah, do a little test beforehand. Then if you can record with a backup device, do it, and don't just collect your interview. Try to collect some of the sounds to set the scene if you're meeting someone in person, and you might be able to set up something really neat for your story. So yeah, those are kind of my overarching tips for interviewing and then recording. I'll say, don't be afraid to reach out to someone. Like I said, you'll probably be surprised. People are really generous with their time and excited to share their experiences. And it's really awesome when somebody says yes, and you get the opportunity to learn more about who they are and what areas they're interested in. So thank you so much for listening to me and hearing my experiences. I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have, and look forward to hearing more about the podcast that you're working on.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording right now, and then we can go into the question period.
Great.